is a little difficult for me to do nowadays because I'm like almost a solid bone now.
For 20 years, Mick Mars stayed silent while Mötley Crüe's darkest secrets were buried under fame and chaos. But now, at 74, he's finally breaking his silence, exposing the shocking truths fans were never meant to hear. From backstage betrayals to twisted band feuds, Mick reveals the chaos that tore them apart from the inside. If you think you know Mötley Crüe, think again. The truth is far darker than you ever imagined. Stay tuned. Mick Mars wasn't born a rock star. He was Robert Allen Deal, a quiet kid growing up in a modest family, far from the lights and noise of the stage. As a teenager, life hit him hard when he started feeling a deep, burning pain in his back that wouldn't go away. At just 14, he found out he had ankylosing spondylitis, a brutal disease that slowly fused his spine and made every move feel like a battle. For most teenagers, this would have crushed every dream. But Mick found something that gave him hope: a guitar. Music became his escape. Whenever the pain was too much, he would grab his guitar and let the notes drown out the noise in his head. While other kids were out playing sports or hanging out, Mick was locked in his room, practicing riffs, pushing himself to play, even when his back screamed in pain. Inspired by legends like Elvis Presley and the raw sound of blues, Mick started to find his own style. It wasn't polished or pretty, but it was real, gritty, heavy, and honest. By the time he was in his late teens, Mick was already playing in small bands around Southern California, hustling gigs in bars where no one knew his name. The road was tough. A factory job injury nearly ended his playing before it even began, but Mick quit and decided music was the only path for him. He didn't care about fame, he just wanted to play. Every day he fought through pain that most people can't imagine. All because he couldn't let go of the guitar. In 1980, ready to leave his past behind, Robert Deal became Mick Mars. It wasn't just a new name, it was a promise to himself to go all in. He placed an ad looking for other musicians, and that's when he met Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and Vince Neil. Together, they formed Mötley Crüe, and Mick's heavy, fierce guitar sound became the backbone of the band. Behind every riff was a man who fought pain just to stand, who refused to give up, and who turned his suffering into music that would define a generation. When Mötley Crüe exploded onto the scene, they were everything the ADS wanted: loud, wild, and unstoppable. Their leather jackets, big hair, and screaming guitars took over stages and TV screens. They sold out arenas and became the kings of chaos, living a lifestyle most people could only dream of or fear. But while the world saw the wild parties and fast cars, Mick Mars was living a completely different story, one hidden behind his dark sunglasses and quiet presence on stage.
When I was a kid, and I knew what I was going to do this, right? Be a musician, but when I saw like a lot of the old people on there, I go like, "What's Grandpa doing?" you know. But that vibe of the bands from '80s and '90s and '70s, like the Stones, and '60s, like the Stones, it's like you don't really think about that so much because most of your crowd grows up with you, you know.
Every night Mick walked onto the stage, the lights would hit and the crowd would roar. Fans would scream, throwing their hands in the air, living in the moment. But behind those bright lights, Mick was battling pain, so severe that just standing with a guitar strapped around his neck felt like fire crawling up his spine. Ankylosing spondylitis doesn't care about fame or sold-out shows. It doesn't take a night off when you're on tour. Every note Mick played came with a price, but he never let the fans see it. While Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and Vince Neil were jumping off hotel balconies, trashing rooms, and living out every rock star fantasy, Mick was the quiet anchor holding the music together. He wasn't out for the spotlight or the endless parties. He was there to play, to create the riffs that gave Mötley Crüe their raw, aggressive sound. But it was impossible to ignore the chaos around him. The drugs, the alcohol, the arrests, it all became a part of the band's image. And it was as real as it was dangerous. There were days when Mick could barely move before a show, needing hours just to loosen his body enough to play. The disease was relentless, fusing his spine and making each movement more limited, each show more painful. But Mick refused to quit. Music was his lifeline, and even when he felt like his body was betraying him, he found a way to walk out on stage and play, pushing through with a quiet strength that most people never saw. While Mick was dealing with constant pain, the rest of the band was dealing with their demons in a different way. Nikki Sixx was fighting heroin addiction, with near-fatal overdoses that would land him in the hospital, only for him to get high again the moment he was released. Tommy Lee was known for his wild, reckless energy, getting into fights and constantly making headlines. Vince Neil's struggles with alcohol and run-ins with the law added to the chaos. The band was on the edge, always pushing limits, and sometimes it was too far. Mötley Crüe's music reflected this chaos. Songs like Shout at the Devil and Too Fast for Love weren't just loud for the sake of being loud. They were the soundtrack of a band living on the edge, channeling their wild energy into the music. But as the years went on, the dark side of this lifestyle became harder to ignore. Addiction started to take its toll, and the brotherhood that once held the band together started to crack under the pressure. But through all of this, Mick stayed focused on the music, even as he became more isolated. The long tours were brutal on his body, and while others could party all night and show up the next day, Mick was trying to manage his pain just to get through another performance. Sometimes he felt like an outsider in his own band, surrounded by chaos that he couldn't be a part of, nor did he want to be.
I went to rehab. I left rehab. I went back. I got on drugs. I did some just cold turkey stuff and would last a couple weeks. But it was really, it was almost 20 years ago or so. I had a really bad overdose. Ended up in the hospital. Came out, shot up again, overdosed again, and it was the next morning I woke up and the light just went on, and it was over. I never picked up again.
There were moments when the band came close to falling apart, with fights breaking out and threats of quitting. The music industry saw the band as a cash machine, and the pressure to keep performing, to keep making hits, was constant. Mick was caught in the middle of wanting to stay true to the music and dealing with a band environment that was spinning out of control. Despite all of it, the band kept producing albums that fans loved, and the tours kept coming. Mick would strap on his guitar, walk on stage, and let the music speak, even when the pain made him want to collapse. The roar of the crowd, the energy of the music, and the connection with the fans gave him a reason to keep going, night after night, year after year. As the 90s arrived, the music scene began to change, and so did the band. The grunge movement was taking over, and the glam metal scene that Mötley Crüe dominated was starting to fade. Inside the band, the tension was building. The chaos that once bonded them now felt like a burden, and the issues they could once ignore were impossible to push aside. Mick, who had always been the quiet backbone of the band, felt the distance growing between him and the others. His health was getting worse, and it was clear that the endless cycle of touring was taking a toll that his body could no longer handle. While the band's wild energy had once driven them to success, it now threatened to tear them apart from the inside. Fans would see Mötley Crüe on stage and think they were watching a band living the dream. But for Mick, every show was a battle. The disease was relentless, and the pain was constant, but he kept playing, kept creating the sound that made the band what it was. Even when he felt alone in a room full of people, even when the chaos around him made him question everything, Mick Mars held on to what mattered most to him. The music, behind the fame, the headlines, and the chaos, Mick's story was one of silent endurance. He wasn't the loudest in the room, and he didn't need to be. His guitar did the talking, and through every note, every chord, he told his story of resilience. While the world saw Mötley Crüe as the ultimate rock stars, Mick Mars was the quiet force that kept the music alive, even as everything around him was falling apart. His hidden pain was the price he paid to keep the music going, and despite the chaos, Mick's dedication to his craft never wavered, proving that true strength doesn't always need to shout to be heard. After decades of pain and carrying Mötley Crüe's heavy riffs on his back, Mick Mars finally reached a point where his body couldn't take it anymore. In 2022, at 71, he announced his retirement from touring, shocking fans who had seen him fight through pain for years without complaint. The band made a public statement thanking Mick for his years of dedication and announced John Five as their new guitarist almost immediately. In the final promo, the CIAO asked Mick, "On the surface, it looked like a simple passing of the torch, but behind the scenes, things were about to get messy." For Mick, leaving the stage wasn't just stepping away from live shows. It felt like being erased from the very band he had helped build. The announcement came off cold, and the quick replacement hurt, making it clear that the band was ready to move on without him. After everything he had sacrificed, all the years he had played in agony, it felt like the door was slammed in his face. Fans didn't know it at the time, But Mick's retirement was just the start of a much bigger fight. In 2023, news broke that Mick was suing his former bandmates. He accused Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and Vince Neil of pushing him out and trying to cut him out of the band's profits, forcing him to sell his 25% share for far less than it was worth. For Mick, it wasn't about the money alone. It was about respect and the decades he had given to the band, even when every performance was a fight against his body. The legal documents revealed shocking details that turned the rock world upside down. Mick claimed that Nikki wasn't even playing live bass on many of their tours, relying on backing tracks to cover up mistakes. Similar claims were made about Vince Neil's vocals and Tommy Lee's drumming, suggesting that the live shows fans paid to see weren't as live as they thought. These revelations were explosive, shaking the band's reputation for being raw, real, and untamed. For years, Mötley Crüe had been seen as the kings of chaos, living the rock star life to the fullest while delivering high-energy performances. Now, fans were questioning what was real and what was fake. Mick's lawsuit wasn't just a legal fight. It was a spotlight on the cracks in the band's image that had been carefully hidden for years. The band responded, claiming Mick's health was too poor for him to continue and that they had acted in the best interest of the group. But Mick felt betrayed, believing the band he had helped build was now turning its back on him in his weakest moments. It was a painful reminder that in the world of rock and roll, loyalty could fade quickly when money and power were on the line. Behind closed doors, Mick was dealing with more than just legal battles. His health continued to decline, the disease that had plagued him since he was a teenager progressing relentlessly. The pain didn't stop just because he wasn't touring anymore. But despite everything, Mick refused to let the situation define his final chapter. While lawyers argued and headlines speculated, Mick was quietly focusing on what mattered most to him: his music. He began working on his solo album, The Other Side of Mars, determined to create something that was entirely his, free from the chaos and control of Mötley Crüe. The album became his therapy, a place where he could pour out the years of pain, betrayal, and love for music that had kept him going through it all. For the first time in decades, Mick was making music on his own terms, without anyone telling him what to play or how to sound. Fans and critics were taken by surprise when the album dropped. It wasn't a desperate attempt to cling to the past. It was raw, heavy, and emotional, filled with the powerful guitar work that only Mick Mars could deliver. Through the haunting melodies and gritty riffs, listeners could feel the story of a man who had spent his life fighting battles most people never knew about, both physically and emotionally. While the lawsuit with Mötley Crüe was still ongoing, Mick's album was a reminder that he was more than just a guitarist in a famous band. He was an artist who had never stopped caring about his craft, even when the world seemed to move on without him. The album allowed fans to see the real Mick Mars, not just the mysterious figure in the background of wild Crüe shows, but a man who had endured unimaginable pain while giving the world music that defined a generation. The legal battle revealed more layers of betrayal, with stories leaking about business decisions made without Mick's input, money disputes, and growing tensions that had been boiling for years. It became clear that the brotherhood the band once spoke about had turned into a business relationship, and Mick, who had always put music first, found himself on the outside of the empire he helped build. Through it all, Mick stayed true to himself. He didn't turn to tabloids or social media rants. He let his music and actions speak, showing that even after everything, he still believed in the power of rock and roll. For Mick, this wasn't just about settling scores. It was about protecting his legacy and reminding the world who he was and what he stood for. In many ways, Mick's legal battles and the shocking truths that came out of them were a wake-up call to the industry and fans alike. They revealed the harsh reality behind the glamorous image of rock bands and the personal cost that often comes with it. Mick's fight wasn't just about Mötley Crüe. It was about every artist who had ever been pushed aside or silenced. As the world watched the lawsuit unfold, Mick continued to create, proving that even as his body struggled, his spirit remained unbreakable. His journey through retirement, betrayal, and the fight for his rightful place in rock history became a story of resilience and strength, showing that true legends don't need the biggest stage to leave their mark. Mick Mars' story is not one of defeat, but of reclaiming power. It's about a man who gave everything for music, only to be cast aside, and his refusal to let that be the end of his story. In the end, despite the pain, the lawsuits, and the shocking truths, Mick proved that his love for music and his dedication to his art would always outshine the chaos around him. After everything Mick Mars went through, the years of pain, the chaos of Mötley Crüe, and the betrayal he felt when he was pushed out, most people would have just disappeared quietly, letting the story end there. But Mick wasn't like most people. Even after retiring from touring and stepping away from the spotlight, he refused to let that be the final chapter of his life. He knew there was more music inside him, waiting to come out. Music that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations or chaos. It was time for Mick Mars to step out on his own terms. While the lawsuit with his former bandmates raged on, Mick found himself in a quiet place for the first time in decades. The constant demands of touring, the late-night flights, and the pressure of keeping up with the band's insane lifestyle were gone. It was just Mick, his guitars, and the music he had always loved. He could finally breathe and think about what he truly wanted to say, without anyone telling him to turn the volume up or write a hit for radio. This freedom was new, and it felt good. Mick started working on his solo album, The Other Side of Mars, with a clear vision. He didn't want it to sound like another Crüe record. He wanted it to sound like him, raw, real, and filled with the stories he had carried inside for so long. Every note he played came from a place of deep emotion, reflecting decades of pain, betrayal, and quiet strength. It wasn't about proving something to the world, it was about expressing who he truly was as a musician and as a person. In the studio, Mick felt alive again. Even though his body still hurt and his movements were limited, his mind was sharp and his fingers still had the magic that created the riffs fans had loved for years. He surrounded himself with people who respected his vision, musicians who weren't there to chase fame, but to help him bring his sound to life. The sessions were long and sometimes exhausting, but for Mick, it was worth every second. When The Other Side of Mars was finally released, it wasn't just an album, it was a statement. Fans and critics were stunned by how powerful and honest it was. It wasn't a desperate grab at past glory, it was something fresh, filled with heavy riffs, soulful melodies, and haunting solos that only Mick could deliver. Songs on the album spoke of struggle, hope, and the fight to stay true to yourself, even when the world tries to tear you down. Listening to the album, you could feel the years of Mick's journey in every note. The pain from his disease, the frustration from being pushed aside, the love he still had for music, it was all there, woven into the sound. Tracks like Loyal to the Lie and Killing Breed became anthems for those who had felt forgotten, reminding them that even in darkness, you can find your voice again.
For Mick, the album was more than just music. It was therapy. It allowed him to process everything he had been through without bitterness. Instead of letting anger control him, he turned it into art, using his guitar as a way to speak when words weren't enough. Fans connected deeply with the album because it was real, and in a world full of fake smiles and curated images, Mick's honesty was refreshing. After the album's success, Mick didn't stop there. Despite his health challenges, he decided to take the music on the road, but on his terms. No massive, chaotic stadium tours. Instead, he played smaller, more intimate shows where he could connect with fans who had supported him for decades. Each show was a celebration, a gathering of people who understood that music was more than just entertainment. It was a lifeline. Fans who attended these shows described them as electric and emotional. Seeing Mick on stage, still delivering those powerful riffs despite the pain, was inspiring. It reminded people that you don't have to be loud to be strong, and you don't have to fit the world's expectations to be successful. Mick's journey became a symbol for anyone who had been pushed aside or told they were finished, showing them that you can always find a way to rise again. Mick also began mentoring younger musicians, sharing the wisdom he gained from decades in the industry. He didn't sugarcoat the reality of the music world. He talked openly about the challenges of touring, the dangers of fame, and the importance of staying true to yourself. For many young artists, his words were exactly what they needed to hear, reminding them to focus on the music rather than getting lost in the chaos around it. As time passed, Mick's influence only grew stronger. While Mötley Crüe continued with their tours and public drama, Mick quietly built a new legacy, one based on authenticity and courage. His willingness to step away from the band and start over at a time when many would have given up became a powerful story of reinvention. He showed the world that it's never too late to find your own path, no matter how many obstacles stand in the way. Mick's health challenges never fully went away, and there were days when the pain was so intense that getting out of bed felt impossible. But even on those days, he found a way to keep going, finding strength in the music that had saved him countless times before. His guitar wasn't just an instrument. It was an extension of who he was, a tool that allowed him to share his truth with the world, one note at a time. Through The Other Side of Mars, Mick redefined what it meant to be a rock legend. He proved that success isn't just about fame or fortune, it's about staying true to your art and using your voice even when it shakes. His journey inspired fans to keep fighting for their dreams, reminding them that their stories weren't over, no matter how hard life got. In the end, Mick Mars's reinvention wasn't about leaving behind the past. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and using it to create something new. His story became a reminder that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always another side. A place where you can be yourself, where your pain can become your power, and where your true voice can finally be heard. Mick Mars may have stepped away from the chaos of Mötley Crüe, but he didn't step away from music. He found a new way to live, a new way to create, and a new way to inspire. The Other Side of Mars isn't just an album. It's a testament to the human spirit, a reminder that even after decades of struggle, you can still find your place, your peace, and your purpose. Mick Mars showed us all that reinvention isn't just possible, it's worth it.